Here we are
Yes.
in our home.
Yeah.
Very intimate podcast, I feel.
Weather is not permitting us to be outside.
Yeah, be drenched.
Yep.
Well, I think the convo we were going to have today was about like being single, dating, going into
You're
relation.
single?
No, I'm saying in general,
Oh, okay.
being single, dating, then going into marriage,
Ah,
and how all of that is connected, but we can pause along the way as we go down that route.
is that how you pause? By driving a little tiny car?
Yeah. My reference is like we're driving and we're passing these ideas and we're going to stop as we go along.
Okay. So we're starting with singledom?
Yeah, in
Okay.
today's modern world.
Oh, gosh.
I know. I think we have a couple of people we know that are trying to navigate all of that.
Yep.
And like, there's that huge buzz of online dating, and you're also trying to, there's this uncomfortable place where you're so eager to have that intimate connection, but you don't know fully who you're like forming this bond with.
Yeah. And I think I did the online dating for a long time. And I think the other thing that comes up with that is you are interacting with lots of people, so what I always felt like is that you're fighting for the attention of somebody with like 15 to 20 other people. And so it's like if you are not the creme de la creme and capturing that person's attention, then yeah, you get little snippets of that individual. And so yeah, I mean, to me, what is it? Online dating was like riding a bicycle, but the bicycle's on fire and everybody's throwing rocks at you.
I've heard that one before.
I might have just made that up, but
That's how it felt.
that's pretty much how it felt all the time. But yeah, and also with the online dating stuff is people try to portray themselves, I think, more often of how they envision themselves
Yeah,
or how they want to be
right.
versus the reality of who they are, right? Most people aren't going to like put their worst stuff out there in the beginning.
I think that's the hardest part with online dating and just social media in general,
Yeah.
because it's like what's most sensational is capturing attention,
Yeah.
but getting to really know someone to a point where you're willing to couple with them
Yeah.
and commit your entire life. Like most of the attributes you're going to be looking for are not going to be noticed,
Mm-hmm.
like right off the surface. I mean,
Yeah.
ideally, but I think that that's where, if you're not, people in today's world, if they're not conscious, right, they're looking for that sensationalism for looks. Oh, this person works out a lot, so they care for their body. There's more of that vanity
Yeah.
component to it, right?
When it could be because
This person has really good character.
yeah, or they have excessive trauma and they work out all the time because they have to like try to wear out the internal demons that are constantly screaming at them.
Yeah, they're like, this person's they're really invested in their work and they're an entrepreneur, but they have trauma problems that lead them to control their life.
Yeah, yeah. What is it like the woman that portrays herself as an Instagram model, and then the guy that portrays himself as a internet soldier through video games and that kind of stuff. I mean, yeah, you can pretend like you're something you're not. My philosophy for dating, and I don't have any research or data on this. This is just 100%.
Opinion.
Yes. It was 30, 60, and 120. So I thought like within 30 days, you should know whether or not like you're somewhat interested in somebody. By 60 days, you should know whether or not like you see any potential in that. And by 120 days, you should know whether or not that's somebody that you could see yourself in a relationship with. Because 30 days, most people can keep their stuff together for that long.
Right.
Like 60 days, you're going to have the opportunity to go to dinner with them and see how they treat the waiters, or waitresses. And by 120 days, you're going to see how they react when, I was about to date myself, when their DVD player doesn't work
Right.
or their computer doesn't, work properly, or their phone breaks, right? And how they handle those stressful situations, because people can keep it together for, that amount of time. But my dating history showed me that, like, by that time there was more stuff that surfaced, and you got to see how people reacted and responded to it.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then I think that, like, for me, I never did online dating. I always,
Lucky.
I know, I was not in that world at all. Like,
Mm.
I never had an account on anything.
Yeah, you're not missing anything.
Yeah, my intention though, I intentionally chose that.
Yeah.
I wanted whoever I was gonna date to meet them organically,
Yeah.
like in my life,
Hmm.
And so I think it took being active or involved in healthful environments, right, in
Yeah.
order to meet other healthful people.
So like a community, or connecting
Yeah.
with a community outside of, yeah.
Because then, I mean, this is what like a lot of the nonprofit is based on is connection through activity,
Hmm.
right? And I think we could argue that in any relationship, that's going to be helpful because you're going to connect over something.
Hmm.
Like that's going to be a big driver of the relationship. And so you want to be really intentional of what is that underlying connection,
Yeah.
right? So what are those things that you're able to harmonize with
Hmm.
underneath?
And like how we bond differently as individuals, right? Men bond through vasopressin, and women bond through oxytocin. So by doing activities and stuff like that, men feel more connective. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's an important part of it. Um,
I mean, I think it's also really important though too, just beyond like how men and women maybe prefer connection or acquire connection, that like it's important because you're not always going to have talking, right? And no matter how you bond with someone, or as far as like these chemical releases,
yep.
activities are going to be kind of this glue of opportunity, to bring people together.
Hmm.
So in my mind, it's like people aren't going to have a thriving, intimate connection if what they connect over is television.
Sure.
And I think that that can be a component, right? It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, we like similar shows and similar movies, right? And we enjoy that time together. Yeah, that's great. But I don't feel like that's like the basis of our relationship.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that it's really helpful.
Well, and I think also, like we've had conversations about it before, is that has a lot to do with disassociation, right? Like, I'm stressed out, let's just watch a show,
Right. That
and
escapism.
yeah, and just kind of veg out, and not have to like people and those things. But if you get in the habit of doing that all the time, and you're not feeding the relationship in some other way, right? Well, then it's easy to feel disconnection. We've had conversations about that because, I bond by us spending time together, right? You like intimate conversation and
Right.
and those types of things, right? Where I feel like, oh, we're next to each other, like
Right.
that cup is full, everything's great,
And
right?
I'm like, we haven't talked about these real things.
we haven't talked in 3 days. Like, what are you talking about? We just talked the other day. You asked me what I wanted to eat.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think when people don't know those things, then it's like being a blind man looking for a black cat in a dark room. You don't know, right? I mean, the importance of attachment, healthy relationships, what those look like. Very commonly people say, I want to be in a relationship, so they jump in a relationship. And then it's like, oh, well, this is not healthy. We don't have good communication. This person doesn't, meet my needs, and all those things. It's like, well, you didn't say you wanted a healthy relationship. You said you wanted a relationship. And so defining what exactly it is that you want. Like, I think I've told this story before, but, you know, Doug had asked me a bazillion times to write the list in regards to what it was that I really wanted in a partner.
Background, Doug is a close friend of ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so um, I did. And then, happenstance, like 2 weeks later, you and I started seeing each other. And then it was like, because I had the checklist, it was like, oh, okay, yes, you meet this, you meet this, you meet this, you meet this. And all those things came in alignment. And it was like, okay, like this is more real. This isn't superficial, right? Like, and also we didn't date to have fun.
Right.
I mean, we had fun dating, but we were looking for a relationship.
Yeah. I mean, I went in looking for marriage. I was like, I'm not gonna. I wasn't looking for marriage. I was not interested in dating just to date.
Yes.
So it was like, I'm not gonna spend my time just being in a relationship.
Yep.
If I'm gonna invest that effort,
Yep.
it's gonna lead to like a real serious commitment.
Yeah.
And so right from the beginning, I mean, we were pretty direct
Yeah.
about what we wanted. And I mean, our first date was like a very comfortable marriage interview,
Yeah.
essentially. It was more serious. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm just gonna hang out with this guy and see what he's like. It was like, what do you want? How many kids do you see? I mean, I remember us talking about parenting and
Mm-hmm.
what we envision for the future and in-depth stuff that I have heard a lot of people are afraid to talk about
Sure.
because they don't want to scare off
Yeah.
other people.
But I think if you scare somebody off, it just means that they're not in alignment with
I
you.
know. And this is
Right.
to me the interesting thing though, right? Is like, I think in dating, what I've heard is there's a lot of this passivity that starts to happen because you don't want to make it uncomfortable and put pressure or expectations on the relationship, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, if you don't, you have no idea if that other person is interested in the same thing as you.
Mm-hmm.
And then here you are investing your time to bond with this person. There's something called, I think it's called propinquity. I'd have to look the word up, but it's this it's what you experience with an Instagram influencer when you're constantly watching their stuff. You develop this sense of closeness and relationship with
Yeah.
them, right?
Yeah.
And they have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
And this is it. You get this bonding idea
Yep.
in your head that's not authentically based, or based in reality,
Yeah.
right? But it's because you're constantly focused on them, watching their material, listening to them, engaging with them, right? And I think that this happens just in the dating world as well.
Mhm.
Like, you may not be having any much of a substance of connection, but you're sitting there exposing yourself to this person,
Yeah.
and it's going to evolve into an attachment of sorts,
Yeah.
because you're just used to that being around.
I mean, especially when you jump into the physical stuff of things too.
Right.
Right. I mean, the chemical interaction that happens because of that.
Right.
Right. And so then when you've exchanged in that way, that chemical bond that happens, then people, yeah, they decide, okay, well, we need to try to make this relationship work because we've already invested this much into it.
Right. And it's hard because our culture is like hypersexualized right now.
Mhm.
So the conversation of celibacy is just like shocking.
Mhm.
It's more shocking than all these variations of how people say that they like to have their sex.
Yeah.
That has become more normalized,
Mhm.
is to talk about that
Mhm.
than it is to even consider celibacy
Yep.
and eliminating sex out of a relationship initially, right?
Mhm.
But I grew up around like more of a Christian influence, so there was this discussion of abstinence
Mhm.
primarily before marriage. And I remember going to a seminar, and this lady explained it like, God has given sex as a glue, and this is why you have to be really careful with who you have sex with, because there's this binding that will happen. And in a marriage, it's helpful to maintain that connection and sense of bonding through all kinds of stuff that happens in life,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have two separate, individual, different people attempting to harmonize their life together and do their life together.
Yep.
But
Explain that whole thing about the glue, because that was something that was really
yeah,
like,
she brought up like a piece of duct tape, and she said every person you sleep with, imagine you're sticking this duct tape to them, and then you decide to break up and you lift it off. You know, that duct tape is no longer as sticky as
mm-hmm.
it was, right? And you have this world of hypersexuality where you're just sticking that thing all over the place, and then guess what? It's not working as a bonding agent in the same way that it was intended to.
Yeah.
You know, but I think really because you become more naturalized or
Desensitized.
desensitized
Yeah.
to it being a component of intimacy, and instead it becomes a component of pleasure
Mm-hmm.
and personal fulfillment, right? And so it's you're not looking at it like this tool to nurture an intimate relationship or connection.
Mm-hmm.
So it changes, you know, how you view it. But I still see it being something that causes attachment.
Yeah.
You know, no matter how many times you have sex, right? Like considering what happens in your brain. So I think that even the idea of casual sex on a just a baseline discussion is very deceptive.
Well, it never works.
No.
Yeah.
No, and I think people, again, there's this pleasure seeking mentality,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and then now you have people who are identifying or seeking and finding their identity within sexual preference,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you have this really convoluted perception of what sex, you know, is and is really meant to be in an intimate relationship. But I think that that's important because it can blur your sense of attachment with people, you know.
Yeah.
And so you see what I've witnessed happen is there's this passivity with standards when getting to know someone.
Yep.
There's these heightened emotions and sexual drive,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then let's say that sex gets involved, you know, and then you're attached to this person. And as soon as you start having conflict because you have differences in values and differences in what you envision for the relationship or how the relationship interfaces with the rest of the world,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes this catastrophic thing because
Yep.
you're trying to maintain the relationship you have so much connection to, yet it doesn't align with what you would have envisioned for a relationship in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, you had an expectation going into it that you didn't set a clear standard of. And then when that's not met, then all of a sudden this devastation happens of,
Right.
you know, well, you're not who I thought you were.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. We have these unspoken expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you go in with those things and they're not met, well, then you create the disappointment for yourself. I mean, and that's the unfortunate thing, you know, is yeah. I mean, especially if it's not clear, you know. Like I know for myself, I used to have that with my relationships all the time. It was like this expectation that just because I do something, you should probably do it back in return.
Right.
Right. Like, you know, if I'm kind and considerate, make
Right.
a big deal about your birthday, you know, well then my hope is that, you know, when my birthday comes around, you're going to do the same thing. And then when it's not met or it doesn't happen, then I'm left with this disappointment, frustration, but I wasn't clear about what my intentions or expectations were.
And I think that that's a great bridge in the discussion to talk about boundaries.
Okay.
Because
What are those?
Yeah, well, so we do have to define that, right? So it's these
The safe distance to which I can love both you and me
Yes.
is healthy boundaries.
Yes, Sean just read that from his notes, and it's from Brene Brown, does a series on HBO for her new book called Atlas of the Heart,
Yeah.
and she interviews someone on that show, and that's what they say. They
Yep.
said, I don't remember the name of them, but no, but I think that that's really good. But so how, like, I think it's important to bring up that you have two ways you can approach boundaries, which is A, this person didn't respect my boundaries, therefore I'm going to cut off this person is abusive, this person is narcissistic. These are these terms right now that are being thrown around very commonly.
Yep.
And people use it to justify disconnection.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the other side of it, which is, as you get to know someone, and if you're likely not going to communicate everything transparently,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we operate in unconscious ways.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you don't even realize what is a boundary of yours until it's breached.
Yep.
Right? So then you have to be able to have a conversation about it. And I think that whole area is really important to discuss when you start stepping into the conversation of marriage. Because marriage doesn't work if you have this avoidant mentality of my boundary got and zero tolerance policy, right? My boundary got crossed and this isn't going to work.
Mm-hmm.
This is over, versus, okay, I'm going to share with this person what I just experienced, how it made me feel, and hopefully that person will be receptive to it.
But you have to have emotional safety to be able to do that, right? So I think that's the big thing when it comes to boundaries and healthy communication within relationships is, I mean, if you think about the four horsemen, if you're met with defensiveness every time you try to bring something up, you're just not going to do it anymore.
Right.
You're just going to start internalizing it or avoid it.
Right.
Right. And so if you can't get to that place of being able to communicate and talk about things openly, well, then it just creates more disconnection and it reinforces the reason why you feel like you need a boundary.
Right.
So you have to have that, right? You have to have the ability to say, you know what, this is something that's hard for me or I'm struggling with or I didn't like, right? And then the other person has to be receptive to have that conversation about it.
Right.
If you don't have that, well then it's pretty hard to have a relationship.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's definitely the balance because for me, I had kind of, as I turned into a teenager, there was a lot more discussion about, needing to set healthy boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Then also receiving the message of growing up of being a people pleaser.
Yeah.
And then, this fear of commitment, right? So there's these layers of perception that I had to face,
Yep.
even in our relationship, right? Like we had all these things in common and a common vision. And then it was like a lot of this stuff got confronted in me, where it's like I had to manage my commitment issues and we had to develop that, like those communication tools, to effectively talk about all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like it happened overnight or immediately, but I feel like the number one thing was the receptivity between each other.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like
More often than not.
Yeah. Where it's like I want to understand where you're coming from. It's not my intention to hurt you, and I want to make changes.
Mm-hmm.
If there was something I did that did hurt you, right? Even if it was unintentional. And I think that that's really important to have in relationships, and that's hard because we have to then take accountability for our actions, and we have to confront shame. Right? Because if I hurt you and it's not my intention, then I will feel shameful.
Mm-hmm.
And I either will get defensive over that because I don't want to feel that shame. I'm going to justify what I did because, again, I want to diminish that shame. Or I'm going to have to grapple with it.
Or I manipulate it,
right?
To go into a shame cycle and talk about how awful of a person I am.
Yes.
Right? So that way you feel bad for me and then don't beat me up more.
Right. Or there's I've done so much for you.
Oof.
I digress.
You don't know what I've sacrificed in my life. Yeah. I mean, I was having a conversation with somebody a while back and was talking about how I wish there was more education in regards to what healthy relationships look like and that it was given to us at an earlier age.
Yeah.
Because if it's not modeled for us, a lot of us stumble around trying to figure it out on our own and just don't have the tool set to be able to get there. You know, and I recognize, our relationship helped me grow as an individual because I could be vulnerable. I could be open. I could talk about things. I was able to turn towards you versus turning away. And because of the commitment to the relationship,
Yeah.
like I felt like, okay, I can't be like, okay, I don't like this. I'm dipping out,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm leaving, and it was never really wanted to leave. Like I just wanted you to say, don't leave,
Yeah.
right? Like I really love you and I care about you and don't walk out the door as I'm being like, I'm packing up all my stuff
Right.
and walking out and
Right.
looking back, being like, don't let me go.
Right.
So, but being vulnerable and being able to communicate those things is important. And unfortunately, a lot of times people weaponize those things and they use it against people.
Right. Well, and I think that it's important to talk about, like, I mean, just from our relationship, the specific things that came up, like specific tools that people could look for and apply, is not that threat, eliminating the threat of leaving,
Yep.
rather than it being even something that's an option,
Yeah.
get rid of it.
Yep.
Because, like, whenever I hear of someone that's going to get married, I really, in my mind, feel like I hope marriage is what it's been for me, for them.
Yeah.
And that's weird to be in that place because for over 10 years, I told myself I was never going to get married, never going to have kids. And come on, go. Our dog wants to hang out with us. Lay down. And then to be that's where it was like challenging to face a bunch of commitment stuff between us. But then now it's been like the best thing ever.
Yeah.
It's like, those are one of those situations where it's like, oh, I'm so grateful God's plan was greater than my plan, because now being married and having a child are like bar none the best things that have ever happened to me. And had things gone my way,
Yep.
I wouldn't have had those things.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy to think about. But anyways, like eliminating that. And then the other thing, that's happened in our relationship is because we both have had times of like, we're emotionally flooded. And so we get some level of reactivity between us, and like the tool of being able to take a time out and just separate for a moment,
Yep.
or some time, and then come back after that tension has dissipated. Or like there's times also where if I feel like you've been reactive, instead of me like jumping back, at it, restricting that. And that's been challenging for me because, I've always had like pride and ego. Like those are big things in my life that I've had to grapple with, And then like I use words and arguments to win,
Yeah.
and have this upper hand power position basically. And instead of weaponizing that,
Yeah.
Realizing that there's flooding happening and restricting my witty, smart A comments back,
Yep. We're eliminating sarcasm,
Yes.
like from things, and not trying to intentionally hurt each other with the words.
Right.
So, I think it was Jordan Peterson that said it, where he said, if you're trying to win an argument within a relationship, you're calling the other person a loser, right? And nobody wants to be stuck in the house with a loser for the next 2 weeks.
Right.
And that really like made me look at things in a very different way, because the other tool that we were talking about with the emotional regulation is when we separate, not thinking about yourself and what's going on, but thinking about what potentially could be happening for the other person. Because that switches you out of that limbic system and allows you to be able to switch into empathy, right? Which when you come back, you're going to be more connective and more relational. Which before, like if we separated, it was like, oh man, I've got my court case together,
Right.
When we come back, now I'm really ready because I've had enough time to logically think about this to be able to argue my points,
Right.
which never went well. And so being able to separate and think about, like, okay, so what is it potentially is going on with you, and then being able to talk about that. Like, hey, I understand, like, why you would feel this way. I can understand, like, why this would bother you, right? And that has built more connection and allowed me to not be as defensive
Mm-hmm.
and have accountability for things, and yeah, soften,
Yeah.
like, within disconnection that happens, right? Because nobody likes disconnection. The scramble is usually to try to fix things to go back to
Right.
that comfortable feeling, but sometimes we don't handle it right, right? And sometimes we need more time, but being able to discuss those things and talk about it, has been extremely beneficial for our relationship.
Yeah. I think also too a big component of what's propelled us into having healthier communication and nurturing that sense of like commitment and closeness
Hmm.
through our relationship has been how we identified the goal of wanting healthful communication.
Yeah.
It wasn't this thing that just kind of happened.
No.
We were both like, no, this is something we want. What are the tools we need to get there?
Yep.
And so I think that harmonizing in relationships and just clearly identifying that goal can be super powerful.
Sure.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just like working towards something and hoping that that other person is going to catch on at some point. And it's like you have to have that open communication about that,
Yeah.
and get
And one person just can't do the work.
right.
It can't be, that I went and read this self-help book, and when it comes to relationships, I'm going to do this work, and then it will spill over onto you, and then we'll be better.
Right.
It takes two people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So we went dating, relationship, marriage. Yeah.
I think those are all really good points.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also too, like, I mean, it's hard to not talk about the discussion of God in a certain way because, you had your list of what you wanted,
Hmm.
and I had ideas of the relationship that I wanted,
Hmm.
but I didn't know if it was possible,
Yeah.
because I had never had it embodied for me or modeled for me. I didn't know anyone that had it at the time, really, but I knew the intimacy and the depth of connection that I desired from a marriage. And I think that it's like the way that we met and the way that our relationship has evolved, it's been like it's hard not to acknowledge this idea of fate in
Hmm.
a way, because I feel like I have been so blessed by our relationship, and
Yeah.
it's been everything and more of what I've dreamed of.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of interesting to think about how all of that evolved. And so, yeah, like as I reflect back on my life, I was very focused on my own will and my own ability to create a relationship like that, or
Yep.
or find a person that would fit in that. And like I think the past relationship I was in, I stuck around for 4 years too long, ultimately. But there was a lot of stuff I wasn't confronting, and I was getting other things from it, so
Hmm.
I was putting up with a lot because of that component.
Yeah.
And so I had to face that. Like, it wasn't until I got out of that relationship that I stepped into a new version of myself that was really equipped to even move into our relationship. And there was like a 6 month period or 5 month period, 5 to 6 months, where, I was changing and moving out of that past relationship before coming into our relationship. And it was like, yeah, I had a whole different level of like confidence in myself and acknowledgement of myself and my worth and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I think that's important also for people to be able to recognize is where they're at in their self work. I think that's been something we've talked about a lot is that we have lived lives where we want to take accountability of ourselves,
Hmm.
and that self accountability and self discipline is of value to each of us individually. And then we were able to come into our relationship and kind of mediate some of that codependency
Yeah.
stuff that could come up, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we had done so much individual work, and then to come together and really speak a lot of the same language,
Yeah.
and then still have stuff come up where it was like, what do you mean this isn't perfect, right? And then having to confront, that no relationship is perfect, and having to work through those things, and it's hard enough to like create this ideal life for yourself, and then have somebody else that you're trying to invite that into, and then carry those same goals together.
Right. You have to like collaborate over it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which in today's society, we're not encouraged to do that. It's all about you,
Right.
right? It's a very individualistic goal set, right? That's where I remember hearing something a while back where it was talking about, your relationship should meet your needs, right? Your relationship should give you this. Your relationship, it was like, if you're talking that way and it's all me, 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 that's not a relationship.
Right.
Like the verbiage should change. It should be about we, should be about like what is going to be best for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the way that you're communicating. That's like a parasitic relationship where it's just like you're feeding off of somebody to get what it is that you want.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that perception completely and totally changed because it was like, you know, being okay with things not always being, I'm not a perfectionist by any means, but it was like the disconnection that I would feel and that kind of stuff hurt so much that it was just like, you know, I don't know that I can bear this. I don't know that I can deal with this. Or maybe this isn't right. Maybe this
Yeah.
isn't how it's supposed to be because it's not what it looks like in the Disney movies and all that kind of stuff. And just realizing like the commitment to the relationship is the most important thing,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to fluctuate through different feelings and emotions, and that's okay, and if you're able to turn towards each other more often than away from each other, and if you have that common goal that we're going to go through this road together, more often than not, you're going to come out in the end better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to be able to define those components because then you also have people in relationships that maybe they shouldn't be in, you
Hmm.
know,
Yep.
and they're tolerating things because of how long
They
the
don't want to, but they don't want to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the big thing is people would much rather not be alone versus, yeah, confronting the unhealthy stuff in
Right.
relationships. Patterns, they're not easy to break,
Yeah.
much less do it with somebody else also, but it's possible.
Yeah.
I think that's the beautiful thing is like we do have the relationship that I've always wanted, and it's not like when people say, oh, relationships are work and that kind of stuff. It's not like I'm, going out and digging a trench and, you know, breaking rock and that kind of stuff on a
Mm-hmm.
relationship. It just takes effort,
Yeah.
right? It's that feeding into it in some healthy ways every day. Being able to speak each other's language, love language, and connect and all those types of things.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Allowing me to be able to go hunting as much as I need to.
Fortunately, you've been receptive to my requests of change.
Yeah, I'm around more than 6 months out of the year.
Well, I mean, you premised right from the beginning of our relationship that you were basically gone for the month of November.
Well, it started in September. So I said the conversation was, well, we have archery season. That's in September. It goes through October. And then you go into rifle season. That's in November. And then if I hop over to Texas and chase deer, that's some December. And you got late duck season in January, and then start fishing for trout and stuff in January through about June. And you were like, so do I just not see you for 6 months out of the year? And I was like, well, or you start fishing and hunting, and look at where we are now.
Yeah, I'm at home with our daughter.
Someday we'll all be able to go together.
Yeah, but there's been other things like there's a lot of security in our relationship
Yep.
though, right? In other ways,
Yep.
and there's a lot of consideration that I feel outside of that, right? It would be different if when you were here, I feel unconsidered and unseen and you're just doing your own thing and then you leave for part of the year and you're off doing your own thing again,
Yep.
but that's not how it is.
Yeah.
Like you're present, you do invest in the relationship and connection and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah. That whole you can't pour from an empty cup thing is so important, right? Because, yeah, I mean, learning how to speak each other's love languages and how one person receives love may be completely different of how one person expresses it. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that it's wrong.
Right.
It doesn't mean that, just because somebody feels verbal affirmations are important doesn't mean that that's a bad thing.
Appreciate hearing you say all of this.
You're absolutely welcome.
Sounds like the information is assimilated.
It's taken a little while, but I'm starting to get it.
But I think also the repair part, like,
Oh yeah.
that's been a big. I love how the Gottmans talk about it's not whether or not you fight, it's how are you repairing, and turning towards each other more than not.
Yep.
And I think that's been a big thing in our relationship is it's not like our conversations or challenges or friction gets left on deaf ears. There is this willingness to do something new and try, to consider what the other person had to say or felt. So I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah, even if it takes me 6 years to finally get
Well, it's interesting because that for me was the biggest part of our relationship when we first started officially dating. I remember I was like terrified when you asked me to be your girlfriend, basically, because it was like, oh my gosh, I'm like committing to this and I don't even know what I'm committing to and I'm afraid, And I had been in a relationship where I felt so unacknowledged and not valued for my perception and stuff. And I remember we sat that night and like talked for like an hour and I just went through this like panic cycle of like commitment fears.
If you don't do yoga,
Yeah.
I don't know if we can be together. Because I don't see how anybody that doesn't do yoga can emotionally regulate.
Yeah, and have that self-reflection. That was what I ultimately wanted. But no matter what I said, it was about what you said, which was whatever. I'll do whatever you need. You're like, if you feel like you need me to do yoga, I'll do more yoga. Like, I want to acknowledge like how you feel, and that immediately was enough for me. It was like, oh, he's not like defending himself or like trying to argue with me about this.
Yeah.
And that was totally new. So I think that was the biggest deal for me initially. And that maintained like through our relationship as challenges came up.
I think it's interesting because this comes up a lot that I notice, and especially if I'm doing couples therapy with people. Like, it very rarely has to do with, like, so we were having that discussion about you wanted somebody that did yoga, right? It doesn't necessarily have to do with the yoga. It's somebody that's going to be receptive to you, right? Somebody that is going to hear you out and see you, right? And take your influence in some way, right? That's the message that's underneath that. Most people, I don't think, get to that point. Most people are just like, most guys, I think, would be like, I don't want to do yoga.
Right.
Like, that's dumb, like, yada, yada, yada. But it's not, I understood more about, it wasn't necessarily yoga that it was that you were wanting me to do.
Right.
You just wanted to know that I'd be receptive, you
Yeah.
know, and you wanted to know that I could emotionally regulate,
Yes.
that I could, like, you know,
Be intentional and
yes.
be mindful.
Yep.
Yeah. That's what it was for
Yep.
sure.
And so I was able to convince you that I had my own tool set.
You actually agreed to
Yes, and I agreed to do more
integrating
yoga.
my recommendation.
Yeah, and I also said, you know, that I get to punch people in the face twice
Yeah.
a week, and that's
Yeah.
my form of therapy.
Yeah. And it was enough for me to step into trust to see what would happen. You know, that's where it was. Like, I didn't have this, well, if you're not going to do it this way, then it's not going to work. You
Yeah.
know, it was like, okay, if he's going to say that this is present, you know, the mindfulness is present in the martial arts and stuff, like, we'll see.
Yep.
You know, it was enough. I felt comfortable enough to test the waters.
Yep. It worked out.
It did. Look at us now.
I know. Now we're having a podcast and talking about all this stuff.
Yeah, because that's bigger than a baby and
Yeah.
managing our lives.
Yeah.
Now we're going through cancer together and major back injuries together.
Oh, just the joy.
And the love is just overfilled or overflowing, right?
That's what every love story talks about, right? Is all these challenges that come up.
Yep.
So,
And I love you. I feel like my love for you is growing with each passing day. And that's a blessing.
yeah.
When so many people, I feel, share the message that, like, oh, I want what I once had with them, or
Yeah.
it'll never be the same. You know, that was what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty amazing to be in something totally opposite of that. So, yeah.
What it takes to get to that point.
I know. It's worth it.
I agree.
It's worth it.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Happy, loving, caring marriage. I mean, yeah, it's amazing.
I know.
Love you.
I love you.